trauma insurance is actually not related to your capacity to work. It's actually related to the severity of your illness and whether it is a condition that is covered or not. Now, in some ways, that's great because theoretically, you might still work while you're suffering or have suffered one of these injuries. How great is that? We're just finding the silver linings wherever we can. But in all seriousness, there is no requirement for you to be off work generally for a period of time. So you might want to or have to or keep working. But the flip side to that is you might be like, well, I have this weird, obscure, very rare condition that is not covered in the list of conditions that is seriously costing me money, that is seriously impacting my life, and I can't work, and I didn't get income protection because I decided for whatever reason not to get it, and trauma isn't paying me. We're back to that jigsaw puzzle gap. So, trauma insurance and child cover generally have a list of specified conditions, very clearly defined. They cover X, Y, Z, all the way down from A to Z, all types of medical conditions. Trauma insurance for children or child cover generally has a lesser list, so less conditions covered. But as I mentioned, generally at age 18, it automatically converts to a full adult trauma cover, which incorporates or encompasses a lot more. And look, if you look online, you'll see we cover 54, we cover 63, we cover, 57. Like all of them will have slightly different numbers in terms of the conditions that they cover. But we are talking about serious illnesses. And the vast majority of claims that I saw that were successful for trauma was cancers, heart attacks, strokes. They were the big ones. There are lots of other things that are covered, but in terms of precedence or propensity, I don't know the right word, the most common claims, you can tell I need coffee. You need so much coffee before you do any talking on these types of things, I think. Cancers, heart attacks, strokes. Now, within those, there are specific conditions that need to be met. So it's not just like, oh, you got told you had cancer, we'll write you the check. It but it depends what type of cancer you had, at what level you had it at, and whether you are eligible for what they call a partial payment, so a percentage of the amount that you're covered for, which normally happens when it's an earlier stage event, or a full payment if you met the full definition. Now, not all of the definitions or conditions that are covered have a partial payment option, or you might need to take out like the plus or the extra bells and whistles to get some of those partial payments. But the idea would be, okay, you suffered an event, but you got got it or caught it, which I just then called caught it. You caught it early, so your need is less. But we recognize that you have something and it does require some level of treatment and there is some level of impact. Therefore, we're going to give you a partial payment. As opposed to you find out you have something and it's quite advanced, you meet that full payment, you get paid out the whole amount. Now, it does differ obviously from total and permanent disability because they're not looking at whether you can ever do your job again. They're looking at, did you meet the right level? And for someone who has cancer, you can probably imagine it can be really hard potentially for someone to decide, well, could they ever do their job again? We don't know. They're too early on in their treatment stage, or we don't know if they're going to go into remission or recover fully or whatever. So they are, again, different to each other. You have one and not the other. You have a risk that you need to decide how you're going to manage. So I think most people need some level of trauma cover. It's a big statement. And obviously, if you've got bazillions of dollars of assets, your probs don't need insurance at all. And so thank you for being here and just playing along at home, but not needing to actually do anything about this other than tell other people. But for the vast majority of everyday people who have everyday bills, who have everyday problems and financial trade-offs that they need to make, you might want to consider whether you have some level of cover for trauma, remembering you cannot hold it inside superannuation. You cannot pay for it through superannuation. It is not tax deductible. Boo. This is probably, I'm going to say maybe even definitely, why not a lot of people have it. Because it's not cheap, because again, the likelihood of you claiming on it's quite high, which is why a lot of people who do have it don't have a huge amount of it. I myself don't have if you look at how much life insurance I have and total and permanent disability cover I have, way, way more from a numerical standpoint than I have of trauma insurance. There's a couple of reasons for that. TPD, we talked about in the last episode. I think if you have that, you're going to need a considerable amount potentially to look after you. But also from a trauma insurance perspective, there is a cost implication and there is potentially a consideration of, okay, well, if I have income protection, at least if I'm off for a period for one of these serious medical events, I at least have some percentage of my income being covered. And perhaps I've got private health cover, which covers, as we know, only a portion of my medical needs. And I can use some of this trauma insurance to perhaps top up some of that income or pay for any of that out-of-pocket stuff. You know, I didn't claim on trauma insurance for my endometriosis surgery that I had earlier this year, although I did actually find out after I had my surgery that there is an insurer in Australia who would have covered me and I would have received a full trauma payout had I been covered with them. I think they are the only people in Australia that cover endometriosis. Now, annoyingly, like 15, 17, however many years ago it was when I put that in place, I wasn't diagnosed with that because remember, if I had been diagnosed, they wouldn't have covered me anyway. But B, it wasn't even on my radar to look at those covers. And I guess it's one of those things that I've said in the previous episode, which is if you know what you're going to have, when you're going to have it, and what your life will look like at that point, you could then very easily be like, right, well, I need to have my cover with this particular provider. But when you have absolutely no goddamn idea if, when, or how this will ever come about, you can't beat yourself up about the fact that you picked an insurance provider that didn't cover you for a particular issue. You need to look for and get someone to help you look for what has the broadest range of definitions that is reasonable and fair from a premium perspective, that has a good history of claiming, and fair and reasonable in the claims process. And if there are any particular areas of interest, if we can call it that you are worried about, maybe you saw your friend or your friend's family member suffer from something, or maybe a family member outside your immediate family had a particular issue and you're like quite worried about that, talk to your advisor or insurance expert, because there might be one particular company that has a slightly better definition than the next. But it is really hard when you don't know what you're going to claim on. And of course, if your immediate family have something, and the classic one that I saw a lot was if you had family members with, say, breast cancer, particularly if you had someone in your immediate family or more than one person in your immediate family and you hadn't done a genetic test, it is likely you would be excluded for that anyway. I know, and I'm sorry.